Welcome everybody to meeting number 18 of the Standing Committee on Natural Resources. As everybody knows, we're doing this by way of Zoom, so we have to be a little bit patient in terms of trying to avoid talking over one another and making sure that our translators have enough time to digest and translate the questions or comments. So everybody's patience is much appreciated. Before I introduce the witnesses, I do want to sort of do a trip down memory lane here. First of all, I want to welcome Mr. Fast, who I know is substituting today, but I want to welcome our new parliamentary secretary, Mr. Saray, who's only here today as an observer, but we look forward to working with you going forward. And this is a homecoming for you. You started out on this committee. Mr. Cannings and I and Ms. Stubbs were part of that original cast back in 2015. So welcome back. And Ms. Stubbs, it's very good to see you today. Welcome back. I think you're only here for an hour, so we better make it count, but we're very glad to see you as always. So on that note, I'd like to welcome our witnesses. We have with us today, we have three individuals in two groups. We have Dr. Eggert, who's professor at Colorado School of Mines, Dr. Heffron, professor from the Global Energy Law and Sustainability, Jean Monnet, professor in the Just Transition, and Dr. Jeffrey Kucharski, professor at Royal Roads University, as well as in Investment Quebec and Research Institute of Mines and the Environment. Each of our witnesses, as an individual or a group, will get up to 5 minutes to make opening remarks, and I emphasize up to 5 minutes. I may have to cut you off if we go over time because we do have strict time limits here. And then once all of the witnesses are completed their opening statements, we will open the floor to questions from our members. So why don't we jump right in, and I will start in the order that they appear on the agenda with Dr. Eggert. And I should point out that you are free to and encouraged to speak in either or both official languages. You have translation available to you at the bottom of your screen. All of your mics and equipment have been tested, so there should be no problems there. So Dr. Eggert, you have the floor.
Mr. Chair and members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to appear today. I'm a professor of economics and business at Colorado School of Mines, specializing in mineral economics. And since 2013, I've been deputy director of something called the Critical Materials Institute, which is a public-private research consortium established by the U.S. Department of Energy, consisting of research collaborations involving national laboratories, universities, and companies aimed at accelerating innovation to help secure raw material supply chains and ensure the development and deployment of clean energy technologies. I organized my opening remarks around one central question, and then toward the end, we'll offer a few preliminary thoughts on possible U.S.-Canada collaborations. So my central question is, what kind of industrial policies should the United States and separately Canada have toward raw material supply chains? And note that I refer to industrial policy. This reference is deliberate. How a nation takes advantage of its mineral wealth as a producer and how a nation manages its supply chain risks as a consumer fundamentally reflect choices that they make about how to approach industrial policy. And I would observe that a false dichotomy often exists in discussions of public policy that are organized around two caricature-like, mutually exclusive approaches to policy. At one extreme, there's the let the market decide, a sector agnostic approach. And then at the other extreme, there's the have government pick winners and losers, when in reality, most, if not all, governments operate in the messier middle ground between these extremes, where the real questions are two, how can and should government support market solutions, which focuses our attention on things like education and basic pre-competitive research. And second of all, ask the question, how can and should governments steer more quickly than the market might direct commercial activities towards particular sectors and technologies? So for raw material supply chains, the education and basic research approach would focus on the long term, 5, 10 years or more, would only do, I would say, scene setting strategic analysis, but would focus on the important inputs to commercial activities, educated people, and knowledge obtained through basic pre-competitive research. On the second issue of steering more quickly over the short to medium term, we might focus on specific sectors. And if we think about raw material supply chains, things like establishing public-private partnerships to incentivize and accelerate technology deployment and commercial activity in a specific, more narrowly defined supply chain, magnets, motors, and electric vehicles, or rare earth magnets and motors, or battery materials, anodes and cathodes and batteries, for example. And so the essence of national industrial policy should be determining the right balance of government activities that support private solutions over the longer term and help steer more actively and aggressively over the short to medium term commercial activities of special priority. Now, in terms of areas of possible collaboration, and these are not exhaustive, I might suggest opportunities for joint U.S.-Canada, certainly information sharing and broad forward-looking strategic analysis related to raw materials, university-to-university cooperative programs and exchanges for students and faculty, government-to-government collaborations to assess unconventional primary resources, to assess the recovered potential of valuable materials from process waste streams from both historical and ongoing mining, and the potential for circularizing material life cycles. Anyway, according to my clock, I'm now at 5 minutes, so I will stop and look forward to discussing these and other possible collaborations or anything else you might like when we get to questions. Thank you very much.
Doctor, thank you very much. And you're right on time, so much appreciated. Over to Dr. Hafron for 5 minutes.
Thank you, and thank you for the opportunity to speak to you here today. I'm a professor in global energy law and sustainability at the University of Dundee. We have one of the oldest energy law centres here, 44 years old this year. And I'm also a Jean Monnet Professor on the Just Transition, which is an award given by the European Commission. So I'm going to tell you about some research and, let's say, policy work that I've been doing, and it's based on this issue of critical minerals and justice. So a crucial issue for the continued development of critical minerals centers on what the vision is for this industry. In today's world, that vision needs to have justice at its core. As the critical mineral industry keeps developing in Canada, justice needs to apply at the planning, construction, operation, and decommissioning phases of a critical mineral project. It's important that society is clear that the critical minerals industry has learned from errors in the energy sector over the years in project development. B, the value of the critical minerals industry to the energy transition, and C, that the critical minerals industry will contribute to Canada's just transition to a low carbon economy. The critical minerals industry has clearly a vital role, and it is necessary to ensure that the stakeholders are all clear that the industry needs what we can refer to as a social license to operate off Canadian citizens. In terms of exploring risks, the further development of the critical minerals industry is planned in Canada. It will be vital that the risk profile of the industry is reduced. This has clear benefits in lowering costs of finance, ensuring continued operations on site without stoppages, contributing to economic growth, providing good jobs, and contributing to the energy transition. In order to achieve all this, the role of justice has to be clear so that all stakeholders will be satisfied. The international political, business and societal agendas changing with increased calls for more fairness, equality, equity, inclusiveness, i.e., in essence, justice. Hence, it's important that Canada remain ahead of such change and have policy that is flexible to adapt to this change. We can see these calls for more justice if you follow developments due to the 2015 Paris Agreement, climate change action, UN Sustainable Development Goals, taxation, disclosure and transparency issues such as ESG investing, rules of foreign investment, economics, environmental impact assessments, insurance, project finance, and the rise in imagery and data. President Joe Biden has even gone further and even appointed an energy justice director within the Department of Energy in the US. All these areas I mentioned are calling for more justice, and they try and develop and improve just outcomes within society. For the critical minerals industry, ensuring justice is at the heart of its development will only be positive. It will ensure that business will actually develop with less risk, and it will be sustainable into the future, i.e. it will not have to stop operations due to lack of available insurance, etc. So what are we talking about here when we talk about these forms of justice? And we can look at this from let's say, a just framework. And what this involves, there are sort of problems at 4 levels. The first level is ensuring distributive, procedural, restorative justice. I'll be brief in explaining them. Procedural justice should be clear. Restorative justice concerns the need to ensure projects are decommissioned, i.e. cleaned up properly. And distributive justice is key, as there should be fair distribution of wealth created from the critical minerals industry. There is no reason for mining companies to keep earning supernormal profits. The second level of analysis looks at recognition and cosmopolitan justice. These, in essence, concern inclusiveness. Recognition refers to ensuring, for example, Indigenous communities are recognized. Cosmopolitan justice ensures we are engaged with impacts across borders, i.e. what will the contribution of critical minerals to the global energy transition be? How will it impact Canada's energy and climate targets under the Paris Agreement and other international commitments? The third level of analysis concerns space. Where will these critical mineral developments be in Canada? Are they in clusters where, as a result, there may be excessive environmental impacts? Will they contribute positively to regional development across Canada? The fourth level focuses on timelines and planning for different scenarios in 2030, 2035, 2040, 2050, etc. Here, the question can be asked, when does Canada want an operational critical minerals industry that is just and sustainable? If it's 2030, for example,
Doctor, I'm gonna have to ask you to wrap up in very quickly here.
Yeah, what type of law in place? And I would just finish by saying that today, all stakeholders in the critical minerals industry need to be satisfied, and this can be accomplished by reducing the risk profile of the sector. To do so, the vision for this industry has to be that it plays a vital role in ensuring Canada's just transition to a low carbon economy. Applying a framework to achieve justice can provide a pathway for all stakeholders to engage with, ensure that investment happens and the industry grows in a just and sustainable way. Thank you.
Thank you, Doctor. Okay, Dr. Kucharski, you're next for 5 minutes, please.
Mr. Chair, members of the committee, thank you for the invitation. And it's my sincere pleasure to appear in front of this committee today. I'm a professor at Royal Roads University in Victoria and do research and publish on issues related to energy, geopolitics, and international trade. Canada has an abundance of strategic resources that the world, and especially the Indo-Pacific region, need to help develop and sustain their economies. The Indo-Pacific will lead global demand for energy and critical minerals in the coming decades, driven by continued economic and population growth. According to the International Energy Agency, the region will account for approximately 60% of global growth in energy demand by 2040, requiring more than $1 trillion in annual energy infrastructure investment. In my published work, I define strategic resources as including Canada's energy resources, including fossil fuels and uranium, as well as critical minerals, including rare earth elements. I say that critical minerals are strategic because they're relatively scarce, are located only in certain locations, are essential to a modern economy, and integral to the energy transition. Access to critical mineral resources is a national security question for many countries and increasingly vital to economic growth, peace, and security. We need to recognize there are risks to the stability and security of strategic resource supply chains. In the case of critical minerals, limited global supplies, the digital revolution, and decarbonization efforts are driving resource scarcity and thus competition to secure uninterrupted access to CRMs. The principal risk is disruption of supplies, whether through shortages, embargoes, trade wars, conflicts, or more recently, global pandemics. In addition to resource competition, the use of market power as a tool of economic leverage can also be a source of risk. In the past, China has demonstrated a willingness to use its near monopoly over processed rare earth elements as political leverage against countries with whom it has disagreements. In 2010, China cut off Japan from key rare earth supplies in response to a territorial dispute over the Senkaku or Diaoyu Islands. And in May 2019, Chinese President Xi Jinping visited one of China's rare earth magnet plants in a thinly veiled warning to the United States over escalating trade tensions. Chinese economic strategy documents have continued to discuss leveraging its market power over rare earths in response to geopolitical disputes. Canada and our partners therefore need to prioritize efforts to develop alternative sources and bring them into production as soon as possible. I am encouraged by the efforts of the federal and provincial governments to develop a critical minerals strategy, compile a critical minerals list, and enter into agreements with key allies and partners such as the United States and Japan. Developing a viable supply chain for critical minerals in Canada will be the first priority. But ultimately, Canada must also have a strategy in place to leverage our capabilities and resource endowments to forge closer economic, security, and political relations with important regions of the world. It is manifestly in Canada's interest to support the economic and regional security of our partners and allies. And by that, I mean those that uphold the rules-based international order in the Indo-Pacific region, including Japan, South Korea, Australia, India, and others. Canada needs to be well positioned to meet the growing demand for energy and other strategic resources and establish a reputation as a stable and reliable supplier and partner to the region. Canada's stake in the preservation of peace and stability in the Indo-Pacific is significant because our future prosperity will increasingly depend on stable trade, political, and security relationships there. Critical minerals can be an important asset for Canada in this effort. Canada's economic future depends in large part on how we position ourselves to deal with the opportunities as well as the challenges posed in the Indo-Pacific region. It's my hope that federal and provincial governments will work toward coordinating their critical mineral strategies within the overall framework of a broader Indo-Pacific strategy that I understand is under development now within global affairs. It will be important to leverage the benefits of Canada's critical mineral capabilities and resources in order to help advance Canada's broader interests, as well as support economic development, environmental sustainability, and security in this important region. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Doctor. Okay, on to Investment Quebec, Dr. Zaghib.
Merci, Chairman. Bonjour à tous. Mon nom est Karim Zaghib.
Thank you, Chairman. Welcome all. My name is Karim Zaghib, a strategic advisor for a number of Investment Quebec. I've had 26 years as a researcher at the Centre for Research in Quebec, and my 35 years of experience in the energy field. I've developed research studies for circular economy purposes, mines, to recycling and repurposing. critical metals and minerals are critical for the energy sector in particular, and particularly for a transition to clean economies and military and civilian applications. Many countries, including China and the United States, place critical materials and metals as a part of their national security strategies. In 2018, for example, 35 minerals were placed and listed on this list. We have almost all of these in Quebec: aluminum, niobium, titanium, etc. Today, Canada has excellent opportunities, and I'd like to focus on batteries. Lithium-ion batteries in particular are important. Graphite, lutetium are there in our Canadian soils, much as cathodics such as nickel, aluminum, cobalt, magnesium, etc. These materials we have, but we need in Canada
and also secure chain supply with the zero to CO2 emission. We need the collaborations between provinces and also collaboration with the United States. This is great opportunities because right now 85% of lithium-ion batteries are produced in China, Japan, and Korea. And you see that we have OEMs like in Ontario and also in USA and also here in Quebec. So this stable chain supply here in Canada is respecting human rights because we have no any keys to work on that. So we need to think about strategic plan between our government, between also relationship between what you call it private sectors and also government sectors, because opportunity is right here. And we don't like to Canada become like Africa, just sell our natural resources to others. We need to make the first transformation here, second transformation here, and so on. Not forget, we have talent engineer, we have best university here. We are not shy. They said that our university here in Canada are similar to what we have in Boston or Silicon Valley and so on. And behind that also we have creativities. We have one with a large portfolio patent by the past. I was licensing technology to many companies worldwide. So this is what I want really to see about great collaborations and also to think about transportation of our materials and so on. Because as you know, when you spoke about the lithium, the basic of lithium ion is the lithium. And we have at least 6 places in Quebec for the lithium. And then when you see Battery Day, for example, Elon Musk, he said, we need nickel. So we have nickel here in Canada and we have all the materials in. So I like to just make conclusions: stable, secure, less CO2 emissions, and the traceability of our natural resources, and create jobs here in North America. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Okay, last we have Dr. Godbout for 5 minutes.
Bonjour à toutes et à
good morning, one and all, and thank you very much for this invitation. I've been called to come before the committee to share the expertise of the organization that I represent, and we're responsible for these metals and minerals, and also to provide some information on what might be some government support from the federal government in terms of research. I'm the Executive Director of the Mines and Minerals section of the University of Quebec at Abitibi-Témiscamingue. This area, Abitibi-Témiscamingue, is traditionally a mineral-rich area, and we are recognized worldwide for our expertise in mining and environment. We've been working in the institute here over 35 years. We've responsible development, environmentally and socially, of these mineral resources. We're in partnership with various private mining companies, the governments of the province, of course, and other provinces as well. So The competency of our professors, the quality of the research in environmental studies allows us to offer our services as a very valid partner and a leader in the field. Our Research Institute of Mines and the Environment allows us to show our past record, and we are very much in the forefront of responsible development environmentally. In 2014, for example, one of our professors, he is now chair, Bernard Plan, obtained some financial support to work on geochemistry of some of these mines. He was also financed from various sources, both public money and private money, to develop some of these exploitation of critical metals, rare earth elements, and lithium included. In 2015, the university proposed for the first time, jointly with the CEGEP in Abitibi-Témiscamingue, financing of $7.5 million for projects under the rubric of innovation and economy for the exploitation of strategic minerals. And from Abitibi-Témiscamingue in our area, regional project. Now, before obtaining this assistance, this support, we were also recruiting within the organization and externally Professor Couder, who works on the value-added processes of strategic metals, recycling batteries, for example, repurposing. With the various budgetary support that we receive from the innovation services, we created a center of excellence on these strategic metals. $7.5 million, I repeat, which was granted, $3.1 million for UCAP, the university, which allowed us to recruit two professors with our team, to complete the expertise and the profile of the unit. This has allowed us to welcome Jean-François Lagier and Mr. Marc Legault, a geologist and mineral resource strategist. These new persons allowed us to round out a team of 16 professors who are all specialized in various aspects of mineral development and processing. This represents one of the most important departments dealing with mines and minerals in Canada. And we can follow it from mining to reconditioning a site. We've created a chair in geochemistry of mineral exploitation at our university. I've been asked to also present to you some ideas on what type of support that the federal government might advance to the sector. Mr.
Address those ideas during the course of the questions because unfortunately we're out of time right now.
Okay,
We'll have
merci.
to move on.
Okay.
Thank you. Okay, we'll start the 6-minute round with Mr. Zimmer.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Can everybody hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah. I just wanted to thank the witnesses for coming today on this important study about critical minerals. We see Canada's got a very important position in the world. And again, I've always said the world needs more Canada, not less. We need to develop these resources. But before I get into the questions, I just want to correct the record. We heard the minister talk about conservative policy on climate change. And I just wanted to read into the record what conservatives actually believe about climate change. I'm going to read it right from our policy document that says, the Conservative Party believes that responsible exploration, development, conservation, and renewal of our environment are vital to our continued well-being as a nation and as individuals. Further, we believe that an effective international emissions reduction regime on climate change must be truly global and must include binding targets for all the world's major emitters, including China and the United States. We
Point-
believe
point of order,
Canada
Mr.
should create
Chair.
a program to heighten public awareness of the economic benefits of environmental solutions
Mr.
which
Mr.
minimize
Zimmer,
the waste of
Ask you to
resources.
pause for one. Can I ask you to pause for 1 second as a point of order? Thank you. Mr. May, I believe that was you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I appreciate what Bob is doing and what he's trying to clarify. I don't think it has anything to do with the meeting, and I'd like him to get back on track with the theme of the meeting, please.
All right, thanks.
I appreciate that, Mr. May, and I'll get right back to it. I'll finish with this. We believe as conservatives that the federal and territorial government should make joint investments to study and address climate change adaptation in the North. So again, once just to clarify, we heard some erroneous statements by the minister earlier this week and other members of the governing
Mr.
party.
Chair, point of order.
But I will get on to my questions.
I think what Bob is doing here is incredibly disingenuous. To suggest that the minister is potentially lying to this committee is wrong. I think the minister pointed out a very important question that I think Canadians are across the country concerned about and wanting to know where members of parliament stand on their party's
Shouldn't that be
policies.
nice, Mr. May?
Thank you, Mr.
Thank you.
May. Thank you, Mr. Zimmer. Look, there's all kinds of issues that we disagree on, but I think we can all agree on that it's inappropriate to suggest that any member of this committee or any member of parliament or anybody who appears before this committee is saying something that is deliberately untrue or false. So
and far from me to say that, Mr. Chair, all I said was that it was erroneous. Whether they knew about it or not, it was erroneous because I just corrected the record. But let's get on to the question. So I
to clear that up. So go
thank
ahead.
you. Thank you again. And I hopefully I'm pronouncing your name properly, Dr. Kucharski. Is that correct? I really appreciated your comments about the 1 trillion in energy infrastructure that's going to be necessary just to keep up in the future. We see that the electrification of our world is just going to grow. It's not going to get smaller in any way, shape, or fashion. But you spoke about the China's near monopoly and using that position to threaten other nations with that monopoly. I'm concerned about that. I'm concerned about that too when it comes to the Communist Party's investment in Canada. I've never seen it more aggressive and possibly using our own resources somehow against us. You talked about alternative sources and that we need a strategy. What would you do to make this happen? What would that strategy look like? In terms of investment, that state-owned enterprise investing in Canada, what would that look like in the future?
Well, I think I'm suggesting that Canada and its partners and allies collaborate together to exploit, the natural endowments that we already have, such as here in Canada, and share technology and investment dollars to invest in, critical mineral supply chains here at home, and to work to, supply each other and be a competitive source of supplies of these critical minerals to the industries and technologies that are going to be important to the energy transition as it proceeds over the next several decades. So I'm not advocating in any way of Chinese investment in Canada by state-owned enterprises. Quite the opposite. I'm encouraging Canadians to develop their own supply chains in collaboration with partners and allies. Yeah.
Right. And thank you for that. I think we all agree on that as being a northern British Columbian, that I have mines in my riding. We have oil and gas. We have forestry. We have many of those natural resource sectors that we covet investment, but the right investment. I would like to go to Dr. Zakib about your comments too. You talked about developing our resource and the jobs that come with that in North America. How would you advise us? You're obviously here advising us today, but we want to take this steps further down the road. We see the potential of critical minerals, and a lot of Canadians may not know that we have a lot of these minerals in our very own country to develop. Dr. Zakib, how would you advise us to make this a more positive give us a more positive direction for this sector. What would you do to advise us in our jobs here in Ottawa? Sorry, your mute's on, Doctor.
You're on mute, Doctor.
Yeah.
Sorry about that. Thank you for the questions.
Mm-hmm.
Just I give the numbers. This is from Harvard University. 8 millions of people was dead in 2018 concerning the pollutions
Right.
of the fuel, the fossil fuels, à cause de l'essence, à cause du diesel. We need to accelerate the penetration of electrification as soon as possible. And this is great balance, economic balance. It can be, you know, like Quebec, which are importing 1 billion each month for petroleum and so on. So means that electrifications and the strategy to enhance this kind of electrification are very important. And then when we come to, I think there was a question about China and so on.
Thanks, Doctor. I'm going to have to stop you there, and we're going to have to move on to the next set of questions, unfortunately. Mr. Lefebvre, over to you for 6 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Merci tout le monde d'être ici. We have another amazing panel of witnesses today. This is super exciting. I'm coming to you, obviously, remotely from the mining innovation capital of the world, as we say. We call Sudbury, and we call it also the nickel capital of the world, right in my backyard, where we have 9 operating mines, 350 small and medium-sized enterprises in the mining sector alone. So this has been a very, very exciting study that we have embarked upon. And certainly, as was mentioned, one of the main questions is how do we protect or create the supply chain in Canada when it comes to critical minerals, from prospecting, exploration, extraction, processing, manufacturing, commercialization, that we can do the magnets, the motors, the anodes, the cathodes, and how do we create, the supply chain here and make sure that those jobs stay here. And we've heard from many witnesses over the last meetings that we have certainly a large role to play, but we can't play it alone. We need to have partners in the world and allies that we have. So, but before I maybe embark upon that, I also want to maybe, Dr. Chikarsky, with respect to your opening remarks, with respect to the lay of the land right now, when it comes to rare earths and certainly critical minerals, and the role that one other country is playing, and how it's dangerous for one country to maybe have the monopoly in that, and what effect does that have if we continue on that path of making sure that that if countries like Canada do not take a stake in protecting those critical minerals. As you know, we just tightened the rules yesterday on foreign takeovers in Canada to protect critical minerals. That was something that we did as a federal government with those rules. So I just want to hear you very quickly on the importance of protecting those supply chains versus, because of our market-driven economy versus a state-owned economy.
Right. Well, I think that's why it's important for us in Canada to have our own supply chain, independent of countries like China that exert near monopoly power over certain critical minerals. I mean, China going forward, it's expected that economic growth in China is actually going to drive demand for rare earths and critical minerals, such that very likely China will be not exporting as much as they are currently. So not only can critical minerals be used as a kind of tool of political leverage, but also demand itself within China is going to reduce the supply of critical minerals from that country going forward. So it's that much more important that we here in Canada, working with our partners and allies, develop these supply chains so that our industries, including defense industry and the clean energy sector, are not starved of these important materials and therefore, put in jeopardy our industries here at home.
Thank you. Madame Godbout, malheureusement, le président du comité a dû vous...
Unfortunately, the chairman probably cut you off, and we'd like to have you continue, perhaps in your conclusions, what the federal government could do to support you better. I visited your campus September last, and I saw the excellent work that you're conducting. I'd like to give you an opportunity to finalize your comments. How can the federal government assist and support strategic minerals and various projects that you're working on. We give it great significance. It's very important for the economy. Well, thank you very much to give me a second go at explaining my situation. There's been some very important projects developed in Quebec and in Canada, responsible exploitation of these critical metals and minerals. We're not starting from square one. And as Mr. Zagib was saying earlier, we don't want to reinvent the wheel. We're looking to develop a map of where is the expertise in Canada as well as the minerals, how to maintain and sustain this research. The critical strategic minerals depend on monopolies, on market forces, but it's not at all the same context for competition on how research is financed, be it in Quebec or elsewhere in Canada, whether it's federal or provincial. It requires reasonable investments for the long term in the industry so that we can get sustained support for research. We have to review that because a lot of these stakeholders are all at the more or less grouped together, and they are all at about the same speed in exploration, extraction. We're talking about companies that have very precarious financial situations, as the mining sector is generally. So it would be important to get some public investment in these projects in order to go ahead. I know that I'll have to wrap it up quickly, but we have to also to support the development of platforms and the infrastructure of research itself. There's very heavy needs in that area. Well, I thank you. I think I've got 5 seconds left, so I'll thank you.
Asked a lot of questions to the witnesses, but I'll let my colleagues undertake that. Merci tout le monde. Thank you so much for being here.
Thanks, Mr. Lefebvre. Okay, Mr. Simard, over to you, sir, for 6 minutes.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much, Chair. And I want to thank all of the witnesses. Very happy to see you again, Mr. Zagib. We've had a few conversations in the past on other subjects as well. In your presentation, there's one thing that struck my curiosity. You talked about a secure and stable supply chain for critical minerals, of course. I'd like your opinion on the implementation of such a supply chain. What would be the weak points, the weak links, and what could the federal government do to strengthen those weak links? I believe you're on mute. We have the materials, we have the talent, we have the know-how. We have some graphite, let's say. We want to commercialize that. So from the mine, we get steel. From the steel, we purify. But unfortunately, we don't have any manufacturing processing structures in Canada for that. We'd have to get the millwright work done in China or Japan, set up shop. So the federal government must quickly intervene to support the innovation so that we can build the machinery that can process or manufacture these further products. There's various industrial processes involved, but that is a very, very weak link in the chain. The material to build or do the process itself, which are mostly coming from China. Well, I'm not a specialist at all in critical metals and minerals. We received as a witness Mr. Fung, who told the committee about rare earth elements, which can be used in a semi-permanent way. Now, we may not have the infrastructure to transform or process these materials in Canada or Quebec, but we have to develop that infrastructure. Yes, precisely. We have to invest in the infrastructure and develop the infrastructure for every step in the process, because we're going to be losing our expertise. We'll reverse brain drain, not only for the materials, but whether it's for batteries or clean energy. We really need rapid intervention on the part of the federal government. You also said in your preliminary comments that rare earth elements and critical metals are seen as strategic security items in the United States. When we negotiated for Nysium, for example, we asked the government to put traceability criteria for aluminum, for example, because we were getting a lot of material coming, aluminum, of course, from China. Can we do this for rare earth elements and other critical minerals? Yes. Yes, well, and we can do it particularly in the case of traceability for CO2 emissions. We can produce it with renewable energy rather than carbon-based energy, whether it's wind or marine or solar. And we can create these materials, further processed materials here in Canada, maintaining traceability. There's a green signature, if you will, which can ensure zero emissions. I may have a further question for you, Madame Godbout. In your earlier answer to my colleague Paul, the partnership structure for research that we've seen elsewhere, I have the impression that, would it be true to say that it's more difficult in critical mineral field to have these partnerships? Yes. The model that we have is envied throughout the world because it allows the industry to involve itself in research and development. It allows universities to develop a store of knowledge. And in matters of strategic minerals, if we're talking about lithium or rare earth elements, the industry can't afford to do it on its own. And we're not up to speed as to research capacity just yet. And of course, we live in a market-based world. We're in competition with. It's not very fair competition. We're competing against a country which has an almost total monopoly on some of these rare earth elements, for example. So the results of our research will be very important as well. Perhaps a financing model that would be different from the conventional method, particularly for this strategic sector, because that's what it is. I believe we should have specific envelopes. If we take a look in Europe or in France, there is a base funding by the state, and then it's topped up by the industry or the private sector. It won't. Where the money comes from will not change the significance of the research, but we need to get ahead with the research, and we can actually target the investments. Do I have any time left?
Right on time, in fact. Thank you. Mr. Cannings, over to you.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair, and I thank the witnesses for time to come before us today. I'm going to start with Dr. Eggert. You talked about the sort of two ends of the support spectrum, the long-term support through education, research, and short-term support through that, short-term steering. We're in a climate crisis. We're facing this dominance by China that is frustrating a lot of our efforts to electrify our energy systems. Everything is quickly changing and we have to act quickly. I'm just wondering if you could maybe expand on what policies the government of Canada could proceed with that would help us make this change as quick as possible.
Yes, be happy to talk. Can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
Yes. Well, I think you're correct. There's an urgency to deal with things like climate change and separately issues of national security that have gotten people like me out of our comfort zone, because my bias as an academic is to lean more heavily on government as a facilitator of long-term market solutions. And yet we're a decade out from what was referred to the rare earths crisis of 2010, 2011. And while there have been some changes in actual the location of supply chain activity in rare earths and downstream products, the pace of change is slow, and which raises the issue of not just should government have a more activist industrial policy, uh, but through what mechanisms. I think a key role that government can play more specifically is facilitating the transition or deployment of technology that you might call early stage, basically private or basic research, to detailed assessment and assessment of feasibility through joint financing of pilot and demonstration facilities. If one is interested in developing further downstream the commercial activities aimed at battery precursor, for example, anodes and cathodes, or battery manufacturing, I think their multinational collaborations among allies and partners is probably the way to work most quickly, because the fact of the matter is certain countries are probably best positioned to undertake the mineral production. Other countries may be better positioned to undertake the downstream processing, which requires not just a good mineral deposit, but low cost energy, access to chemical reagents, and other important inputs.
Well, thank you. I'm going to turn to Professor Heffron. You talked a lot about the importance of a just transition, justice in all these stages. When we're talking about critical minerals in the mining industry in Canada, I think Canada's come a long way in the last 50 years or so in terms of that concept of justice in extraction of minerals. There's been a lot of progress, I think, made on those fronts, but where we seem to be lagging, you mentioned decommissioning. We've had some real horror stories of decommissioning in some mines. There's a giant mine in Yellowknife, which seems to now require, investment by this government, the federal government, for eternity to keep it from poisoning the area further. We have the situation of oil wells across Western Canada that some companies have set up when they're going into receivership. They set up situations where that fiscal responsibility falls on the government. And I'm just wondering if you have any sort of best practice models of policies from somewhere else in the world that have really worked, that have kept made sure that cost is put on the project, put on the company, and not treated as some externality for the public purse to clean up at the end of the mine's life or the oil well's life.
Yes, so there's what's classed as a energy reserve financial obligation, where companies are have to put money into a bank account, so that there is funds left. There is funds there for decommissioning, and irrespective of that company selling on to another company, let's say here in the UK, the practice has been sometimes that the company would go bankrupt before, nearly at the end of the life cycle of the particular mine, and then the obligation to clean up was left with the government. So more and more we see a financial reserve obligation where companies are forced to put in, 2, 3, 500 million. It depends on the size of the project, and that should provide insulation in terms of a company disappearing in terms of that, some type of bankruptcy or not fulfilling their decommissioning obligation. But the issue of decommissioning comes when, if Canada wants to expand this industry, it's going to need public support, and it's going to need that public support in 5, 10, 15, 20 years if the critical minerals industry is to grow and to be relied upon.
Thanks, Doctor. I'm gonna have to interrupt and stop you. I apologize.
Thank you.
Mr. Cannings, thank you. Okay, now we're into the 5-minute round, starting with Mr. Lloyd.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My first question, Mr. Kucharski, if I'm pronouncing that right, apologies if I'm not. My question is, I'm looking around the world. You said you've talked about inputs in terms of critical mining, and we know one of the key inputs is energy, gasoline, diesel, heating fuel for many of these mining sites. I wonder if you could comment on, I'm looking at countries such as China, which are subsidizing fossil fuels to the tune of about $18 billion a year, versus countries like Canada, where we're actually increasing taxes. We now see that carbon taxes are going to be increasing to $170 a ton at 2030. Can you tell us, how are we going to be able to compete in this industry when we're taxing the inputs when the rest of the world appears to be subsidizing these inputs?
Well, I think, you're right that, fossil fuels probably would be used for a lot of mining equipment and processing of critical minerals in Canada. Although I'm not sure, myself, at what percentage of the total cost of production is represented by fuel. Certainly, if there's opportunities to produce it using clean energy, such as hydro or I consider natural gas as a cleaner energy, then we should probably do so. But I'm not sure, whether we're really at a great disadvantage over other countries relative to the cost of fossil fuels. And in any case, there could be some, tax provision provided to this industry to help reduce the cost of energy, should that be a significant factor or barrier to its development. So,
are you aware of any cost provisions that are currently in place?
I'm not
in Canada.
No.
Okay. My next question, thank you, Mr. Eggert. You're with the Colorado mines, so I'm sure you're very well aware of, mining policy, regulations, taxes in the United States. I wonder if you can comment, what are some of the key differences that you see between Canada's jurisdiction and the United States in terms of critical minerals?
I think in the United States, the critical minerals issue is viewed principally from a consumer perspective. So it's supply chain risks and how to mitigate those risks through a variety of approaches. Clearly, there's a producer perspective that says consumer risk leads to opportunities for additional domestic production. But I would say the principal difference really is in one of perspective between the U.S. and Canada. Canada, I think, has more of a producer perspective. Aren't there opportunities for Canada to get into the supply chain to alleviate risks that customers face? Whereas in the United States, it's in some sense a little more multifaceted.
So, what do you see, in terms of getting a critical mineral mine permitted in the United States versus getting permitted in Canada? What do you see as key distinctions between the jurisdictions?
I'm not an expert on procedures and processes in Canada, but at least by reputation, it is the process of permitting a new mine in Canada is simpler, less time consuming, and I would say more predictable than in the United States. But that's more of an impression than based on detailed knowledge.
Is that on a state-by-state basis? Are some states, I know in Nevada, I have people telling me that they can get permitted in a matter of weeks, where in Canada, we hear testimony that it takes years to get a mine permitted. Is that a whole United States perspective, or are some states in the United States better at doing it?
Some states within the United States seem to be better at doing this. Arizona, Alaska, and Nevada are states that often pop up in surveys like the Fraser Institute survey of mine mineral policies and attractiveness of exploration as among better places to develop mines.
Why is that? In my few seconds left, why are they better?
I think they just are more supportive uh, of mineral development and see the economic benefits accruing to local communities in the states, and therefore, in terms of implementing processes, give a greater priority to making decisions sooner.
Thank you, Doctor, and thank you,
Thanks.
Mr. Lloyd, for sticking to the time. Next, we have Mr. May for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. And to start, I just want to thank all the witnesses for being here. It's pretty amazing to see such a diverse panel of expertise, and I wish we had more time with you. But I'm gonna focus my questions back to Mr. Eggert. One of the things when I was preparing for today, I looked at your background and some of the things that that you mentioned also in your opening remarks, and I was very interested in the idea about the Canada-U.S. Relationship when it comes to these minerals. And I'm wondering if maybe you can elaborate on that a little bit more in terms of how you think that could work, and specifically this area.
Be happy to. I think Canada and the United States are natural partners in this area because not just our close geographic proximity, but similar attitudes about the role of government generally in commercial activities. I think it should be a two-pronged approach when seeking out collaborations. One prong is in the education, workforce development, basic research and development area, where there, for example, could be government-to-government collaborations assessing the resource potential of unconventional primary resources. What's the potential of recovering specialty materials, things like gallium, indium, and tellurium from mine wastes that at present are unrecovered? What are opportunities for more aggressively in the area of commercial policy, public funding and collaborative efforts at pilot and demonstration facilities to speed along or accelerate the deployment of new technologies, even more aggressively, industry-led collaborations involving people or entities from both countries that focus on priority raw material supply chains, perhaps modeled after something called Sematech in the United States in the 1980s and 90s, which basically sanctioned industry collaborations toward a strategic priority, semiconductors.
Thank you for that. With the new U.S. administration placing a heavy emphasis on trilateralism, wishing to also bring Mexico back to the table, not just Canada. Is there a role? Do you see there being a role for Mexico in the U.S. critical mineral strategy? And especially, my question is more, what would that role look like between Canada and Mexico?
I don't have a thoughtful response to that, except that it seems to be a natural opportunity to explore, given, if nothing else, the geographic proximity and potential efficiencies in terms of transportation between different stages in a multi-stage raw material supply chain.
And how far-reaching do you believe the influence of China is with this? And I know we've had some conversations already today about the instability of the industry and price fluctuations and as you know, all these businesses want assurances and want to make sure that there is that reliability of the market. you know, how far-reaching would you say China is in that issue particularly?
I think it is far-reaching. I'm not sure how much of that far-reaching impact is intentional, however, on the part of the Chinese. I think by and large, in the area of raw material supply chains, they're primarily focused on using their domestic mineral resources to further manufacturing in China. So they're looking out for China. As someone mentioned, they are actually becoming somewhat resource dependent on foreign countries. And in many of the supply chains, they actually have greater dominance in the midstream than they do at the mining stage.
How am I doing for time, Mr. Chair?
You have 13 seconds.
Okay, I'll just simply
Put it to good use.
thank Mr. Eggert for his comments today.
Great. Thank you, Mr. May. Appreciate that. And on to Mr. Simard for 2.5 minutes.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Chairman. Mr. Zaghib, you mentioned in your presentation the best placed sector for climate change and low carbon would be electrification of transportation. I was wondering if the pricing of carbon might be positive or negative in towards the electrification of transportation. And I believe that you might be on mute. Sorry. Yes, I think it's a very interesting avenue to explore. But most of the middle-class families would be, it has to be a mixture of incentives and disincentives, as it were. So that subsidies should be in place to help the middle-class family to be able to make the transition. The younger generation today are all big fans of electric vehicles, hybrid vehicles, but established middle-class families have to look at a transition that's a bit more gradual. And I think that both levels of government should be looking forward to incentivizing this transition. If we take a look at major transitions, the government tries to get involved. I think in the last few years we've had superclusters. We've seen that for AI, for example, where the federal government have announced $950 million investment over several years to develop that. I'm not saying it was a big success as far as artificial intelligence was concerned, but do you think that we might create a supercluster for batteries, for example, but particularly for rare earth elements? Hydrogen and batteries is extremely, extremely strategic for transition, a successful transition to clean energy. So whether it be superclusters, whether it be targeted projects, whether it be interdepartmental, they have to participate. They really have to get involved, because otherwise in energy transition, it's not only transportation, it is transportation, but take a look what happened in Texas. They had a complete breakdown in the system. So it's the globalization of the energy transition.
I apologize for doing that, Mr. Simard. Thank you. Over to you, Mr. Cannings.
Well, thank you. And I'll just stay on with Mr. Zaghib, just because he's all warmed up there. But I just wanted to mention you talked about the conversion to electric vehicles might be slower because of middle-class or middle-aged older people. KPMG just put out a poll that showed that 60% of people in Canada have said that they want their next vehicle to be electric. So this might, and I think probably will, happen a lot faster than some people think. But I wanted to ask you about the circular economy you mentioned. When we talk about electric vehicles or electrification, a lot of that revolves around things like batteries and the recycling of these batteries. I have some companies in my riding that are leaders in that technology. just wanted to ask you what you think the opportunities there are in that branch of the circular economy.
It's a great question. So today we're going to have equilibrium between urban mine and natural mine. Urban mine is coming for recycling. We have three types of recycling. Direct recycling. Today we have between 5 to 10% of the cell when we make cell fabrications. These cells are not using, so we need to recycle them. Right now we have a huge market for direct recycling. Behind that we have cobalt, nickel, and manganese. We don't like to continue to get from the mining. So recycling becomes very important to be a complementary between our mining, natural mining, and so on. And also we can create jobs. And this is also, we can be safe because we have the technology, we have the process here in Canada. And also it can be like a great opportunity between USA that we can make some circular economy initiative between USA and Canada for upstream, downstream, and from materials to recycle.
Well, thank you. And just to focus in on graphite, you mentioned graphite before. I have a graphite mine in my riding, and they obviously are facing that problem of finding the middle market, because most of the places that use graphite to make anodes in the lithium-ion batteries are in China, like 99% of them. And I'm just wondering if you could comment quickly on what the Canadian government could do to stimulate the growth of that middle market in Canada.
I know this material for 35 years. We have two ways to make graphite, natural graphite, and also we can use some petroleum coke to make artificial graphite. I believe the federal government must help this mine or this artificial graphite to assist them with investment to bring machine here. And if we have the machine, we are able to make the low cost with greenest, less CO2 emissions. So I have a lot of experience. For example, when I was in Hydro-Quebec, I licensed technology to Nouveau Monde Graphite. So with innovations.
Thank you, Doctor. I apologize. I have to keep interrupting, but we have to keep to our schedule.
Thank you.
Now, thank you, Mr. Cannington. Now over to Ms. Stubbs for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair, and thanks to all the witnesses for being here. Of course, just for clarity on this issue around regulatory approvals among the major mining developers in the world, Australia has an average of 2 years for approval of mining projects. The United States has an average of 7 years for the approval of mining projects, and Canada has an average of over 10 years for the approval of mining projects. And of course, right now, there are 2 mining applications sitting in the queue in Canada, along with $20 billion worth of other resource projects sitting in the queue waiting for cabinet decisions and to proceed through the assessment. And I would invite, but I think we've already established the answer, any witnesses to advise whether or not there in fact are any projects for rare mineral development waiting for approval right now in Canada. I don't know if Dr. Kucharski knows or. So yeah, the answer is no, there aren't any rare mineral projects waiting in the queue for approval. And of course, for approval and for assessment, and of course, it's directly linked to the fiscal and regulatory uncertainty in Canada and the negative impact on the private sector. So I just want to applaud this committee for taking on this study and worry, though, about the length of time it takes for things to happen in Canada. I do want to say, of course, last year on behalf of Conservatives, I called for stricter rules on foreign takeovers over strategic natural resources assets and projects, in particular from state-owned enterprises and China's Communist Party. So I do want to applaud the government on the announcement that they've made this week. And but it remains the fact that the ongoing challenge for Canada is that much of the infrastructure required and mining the approval for mining projects, it takes too long. An example, of course, is that of the Tech Frontier mine that spent 8 years in the approval process and then canceled their application because they were getting signals that the Liberals would deny it. But this this uncertainty has a major impact on investment and development, and it makes really no sense. Of course, I'm sure the members of this committee all know that there's abundant lithium resources in lithium brines and subsurface oil fields in Alberta, and that the oil sands are also sources of titanium and zirconium. And the oil sands, of course, is the largest private sector investor in clean tech in the entire Canadian economy. So given those resources there, the resources in BC, the abundant rare earth resources in northern Quebec and the Northwest Territories in Ontario, I wonder if either Dr. Egert or Dr. Kucharski or Dr. Zahib, do any of you know about any pilot projects that are going on right now to develop these projects that hopefully one day can make their way into the uncertain regulatory process in Canada?
I can just say very quickly that I have the impression that there are pilot and demonstration activities ongoing in Canada, but I can't name any in particular.
Okay. Okay, thank you. Well, I do any of the witnesses know of any that are happening in the private sector, collaborated between all the different levels of government? Okay. It certainly took to unlock the oil sands and the third largest crude oil reserves on planet Earth. It did take a risk-taking, pioneering, and really proactive partnership between governments, academic research, and of course, obviously the private sector, which is crucial in all of this. Dr. Egert or Dr. Kucharski, I wonder if you can just comment on the CUSMA provisions that contain that 3-year window where auto manufacturers can receive duty-free treatment if they source 75% of the lithium being used regionally. And I just wonder if you have any thoughts on the likelihood or the feasibility or the ability of Canada to be able to scale up to reach that level of production within the remaining timeline, which is only 2 years.
Who was that directed to?
Dr. Kucharski or Dr. Zahib?
I am not familiar with that particular COSMA provision.
Okay.
I don't have any information about that specifically.
Okay. Dr. Sahib, do you know about that? If there's any work going on to be able to scale up for audio manufacturers?
Yes, same thing. I am more on science side, so if you have a question on science side or process, this in this COSMA, sorry, I'm not economist myself. I cannot help on that.
That's okay, Doctor. Thank you. And thank you, Ms. Stubbs. Unfortunately, that's all the time you have.
Thanks, Chair.
My pleasure. Okay, and last in this round, and probably last before we conclude with our witnesses, is Ms. Jones for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and good afternoon, everyone. I want to thank the witnesses for your excellent testimony today. I'm a member of Parliament in Labrador, so mining is an old industry for us. But as we look at new mineral development and critical minerals itself going forward, we're seeing lots of interesting changes, but lots of tremendous optimism around where we're going. My question is for Mr. Kucharski. And it's pertaining to an article that was in Brothers yesterday, outlining that the government of Canada has tightened the rules around foreign takeovers, especially as it relates to our critical minerals supply chain. And a while ago, the Minister of Natural Resources announced that there is a list of 31 critical minerals. You mentioned that one of the criteria to be included on that list of critical minerals is that a mineral must be important for Canada's national security. So can you explain why it would be dangerous for a country, and not particularly a friendly one, to own the supply chain for minerals critical to our national and continental security? And I also asked if you can put it in the context of the larger historical context, I guess, of a continental defense strategy. And if you could speak to that a little for our committee today.
Okay, that's a big topic. Well, I think, critical minerals, and I talk about other strategic resources like uranium. So if you use uranium as an example, that's certainly an important mineral that used in the nuclear power and defense sector that we have had strict controls over for many, many years. And so there's a regime around and protocols around that to prevent proliferation and so on. So, I don't know if that could be used, if that's being thought of as a model by the federal government in any way, but I think, that's sort of some historical context for the protection of certain critical minerals. And now that we have a list in Canada, I think it's good that the federal government is targeting some of these critical minerals and ensuring that they use that as a filter when applications are made for investments in critical industries, so that we can prevent, certain countries that are perhaps not allied with our values and with the direction that we want to go, and use that to, in some cases, prevent them from making investments in those. I think that investments over into mines or companies that have some a role in developing or processing critical minerals by a country like China would be potentially dangerous, because they could use their ownership over and control over those companies and those resources to restrict the availability or to slow down the availability of those minerals to Canada and its partners and allies. And so I think, in terms of market power, and so I want to focus more on the economics right now, a country like China that has these state-owned enterprises that are essentially subsidized by the state and strategically are controlled by the Communist Party could exert influence anywhere in the world over how those resources are used. So this is the concern I think the government has, quite rightly.
Okay, thank you for your response. My next question, if I have time, Mr. Chair, is for Ms. Godbout, and it has to do with training that will need to be done before workers can enter the mine and extract critical minerals. I'm not sure what work she's done around this, but is there specialized training programs for different mining applications? And, what recommendations would you have for directions of the federal government around training and preparing workers for the workforce in the critical minerals sector?
Oui, si j'ai bien compris.
Yes, Ms. Jones, if I understood how to deal with training requirements for critical minerals, some technologies, well, the current training situation can respond in large measure to the current needs. We do train qualified individuals. It's post-secondary, of course, all the way up to doctorate level studies. There's going to be a higher need for those resources, those talented individuals, to help us in this industry to develop it, particularly on developing procedures, clean extraction, clean processing, for example. We have to do it in a green mode, as it were. An environmental responsibility, in a word. Another aspect. Okay, thank you.
Witness who ends up being the victim of my cutting them off more than the other. Today it was you, so I apologize. Thank you, Ms. Jones. Unfortunately, that's the end of the allotted time for our witnesses today. So I want to say thank you on behalf of the committee members to all of you for coming today and providing very valuable information. As you can see, we could go on much longer than the time allocated, but unfortunately, that's all we have. But again, we wanted to say how grateful we are. So witnesses are free to leave, and then we can carry on and deal with committee business. We are scheduled to move in camera, but before we do that, I'm going to release the witnesses, and then we can have a brief discussion if that's acceptable to everybody. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
that this is the standard way ministers respond to requests. They provide a date. It is a bit tight with that requirement around the main estimates, but I'm willing to go along with that. And, you know, I would also back up what you said about the minister's attendance. We've also had a pandemic, so this committee hasn't really been sitting as much as it did in normal years in 2020. So, and I've found the minister very approachable and open for engagement outside of committee time. So I would just like to make those comments. But, and yes, I really think that it would be very good to hear from him again. I think a lot of things will have happened in that 2 months. We'll have had a budget finally. We'll have the main estimates to talk about. So I support both the motion and the amendment.
Okay, thank you. I see Mr. Lefebvre and Mr. Lloyd have their hands up. I'm assuming that's because I didn't take them down.
That was my old hand.
That's your old hand. Okay, thank you. Okay, so why don't we vote on the amendment now if there's nobody else who wants to speak to it? Madam Clerk, can we have a vote, please?
Yes, we are voting on the amendment for the date to change, that the committee invite the Minister of Natural Resources and officials to appear to consider the main estimates for a minimum of 2 hours at their earliest convenience, but no later than May 28th, 2021.
Yeah, so the only thing that's changing is the 14th becomes the 28th.
Correct.
For the purpose of this vote, yeah.
Ms. Jones.
I vote yes.
Monsieur Lefebvre.
J'appuie.
Mr. May.
Yes.
Mr. Sadu.
Yes.
Ms. Stubbs. I apologize. Mr. Weiler.
Oui.
Mr. Lloyd.
Sure.
Mr. McLean.
Yes.
Now, Ms. Stubbs.
Yes.
Mr. Zimmer.
In favor.
Monsieur Simard.
Ooh.
And Mr. Cannings.
I'm in favor.
11 yeas.
Okay. All right, so the amendment passes. If there's any further discussion on the motion as amended, we can do that now. Other than, if not, we can move to deal with the motion, although I'm going to take a leap of faith here and based on that vote on the amendment, assume that this vote outcome is going to be the same on the motion. So maybe we can do this by show of thumbs or something to save time. Everybody in favor of the motion as amended? Okay, all in favor of the motion carries unanimously. Thank you all. Okay, that was easy. So now I am going to suspend while we do go on camera. And the email everybody received earlier today, there'll be a second link on there to log in. So I will see everybody momentarily. Thank you.